You had an announcement
I
as well?
do. Thank you, Ms. Chair. Patterson Farm Preservation is partnered with Common. Nine 5841. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Anyone in the audience have an announcement? Okay, then with that, I'll consider approval of minutes for October 18th, 2023. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by James. Saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The motion passes 4-0. 6, we have the presentation from the Ad Hoc Property Committee presentation on Patterson Farm. So how do we want to do this? We want to have Dennis come up with his Dennis and whoever else wants to join Dennis from the Ad Hoc, please do.
Those table mics may not be on already, so you may want to just double check.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. We will have 3 presenters here tonight sharing this load. And what I'd like to do is share my screen, which I'm the last person to be doing this. Okay. Why I have support. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to the supervisors this evening the Patterson Farm Master Plan recommendations from the Ad Hoc Property Committee. Our agenda is slow. I'm going to make some introductory remarks. I'm then going to turn it to Doug Seller of Seller Drury Architecture, who will go over some of the site uses, assessments, and analysis. Then we'll turn to the recommendations of this committee, and that will include myself and Joe Camarata, who's in addition to a committee member, also chair of the Lower Makefield Historical Commission. Our outline will talk about uses for this site and the buildings, the vision, and we'll focus on stage 1, which we've defined as years 1 through 3, and then some closing. As we know, and certainly as you know, Patterson Farm is a beautiful historical natural agricultural site, uniquely that is owned by the township. It's not a private property that we have to try to protect. It is owned by the township and controlled. 234 acres were saved from development in 1998. 184 of those acres are under an agricultural easement. And if you can see the green outline in the map, this is here's this everything outside of that green line is under an agricultural easement, the woods and most of the fields. And there's the balance of the acreage around the 2 farmsteads that is not. There is about 170 acres of tillable farmland. That includes both easement land and non-easement land. 2 historical farmsteads occupy about 12 acres, and there are 15 buildings on this site, 3 homes, 2 large Pennsylvania bank barns, and a number of miscellaneous outbuildings, farm buildings. A summary statement is that both the community and Lower Makefield Township are unsatisfied with the condition and the look of the buildings. It's dissatisfied with the lack of public access to the grounds. The public wants and desires access to the grounds and the building. And there's a lack of strategic planning and management oversight of this historical property. It is an important historical property, as we'll hear later, and eligible for National Registry status. And these are unsatisfactory kind of conditions is what led this board to decide to form an ad hoc committee and look at this issue, and we're very glad that you have. So you tasked this committee, 7 resident volunteers, to work with hired professionals to develop an insightful, executable plan for this site, to identify long-term solutions and goals so that near-term solutions can be made consistent with those long-term goals. One of the observations of the property, and it's a little ironic that our committee is the ad hoc committee, because the decisions at Patterson Farm for 25 years have been that. They've been somewhat ad hoc, a little one-off, disjointed, not necessarily always wrong or always right, but just not in context. We want our decision-making to be put in context. And this is a long-term plan. It's not something to be executed immediately. And so we'll have short-term steps that need to fit into a longer context. We've had tremendous community input, and there are certainly, there's been strong voices and strong interest in this property. We've had over 28 public meetings, plus 2 large in-person forums, where we brought out nearly 150 people on a dark, stormy, rainy night on a Monday with a short notice. Just spoke to the importance that this property holds to this community. We've also conducted meetings with invited stakeholders in all meetings, and we've engaged resident ambassadors. We can say as a committee, clearly there's a high level of community interest and a high level of engagement. While there is a wide range of opinions as to some ideas and directions for the property, we have seen some very clear consensus. One, farming is important and ought to stay, it must stay. For the beauty of the land, people value having locally produced produce, the aesthetics, the heritage. Farming is important, and that's a given. The natural farm vista at the gateway of LMT coming off of 295, coming out of Newtown is important. That's an image that I know the community values. It's also part of our history and our heritage. This was an agricultural community. There are more trees here today than there was before this development all started. This was nothing but farmland. You don't plant trees in farmland. So it is part of our heritage, and we need to hang on to at least a piece of it. The condition of the historical buildings, there's a consensus that it's sad, it's a shame, it's a disgrace. They're not usable except for the 2 that have been rented, thankfully, and utilized. And because they've been utilized, they're in better condition, but the other 13 are sad. There's a consensus that the community really wants access to the grounds. They see this vista, they want to take walks, they see the ponds, the springs, the woods, they want access, and that is clear. Another clear consensus was a real desire to save the most important buildings, but don't bust the taxpayer bank at the same time. It wasn't, save them at all cost, nor was it don't spend any money at all. There's a balance that I think the community can strike and has struck. There's certainly a strong support for use of the buildings in arts and culture to build on the current successes. The 2 rented buildings now are both to art organizations, artists, and that represents a foundation from which we can build. And also the site should be managed by a nonprofit. A nonprofit can provide supplemental funding, volunteers, execute things at a lower cost structure than can a municipal government, and provide much closer oversight and management of the property day to day. So when we started this planning process, or as we worked through it, we developed some guiding principles. Number 1, Patterson Farm remains in agriculture. And agriculture is not the problem at Patterson Farm. It produces more food products today than it ever has in its 140 some years of continuous agricultural production. There's over 14 food products grown there, from cantaloupe and zucchinis and tomatoes and sweet corn, 60,000 dozens of sweet corn. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but it's a lot. And beets, and there are a lot of local produce. The bountiful production has gone on without the use of these buildings. These buildings were farm buildings 100 years ago. They're not needed by farming techniques today. Today, we're getting that bountiful output because of the use of modern technology, modern practices, with major financial investments by our tenant farmer, Charland Farms, in investments in equipment, combine at $650,000, facilities, agricultural inputs. So we can continue to have this bountiful output without use of the buildings. And the farmer ought to have a long-term lease to support those investments. So our plan can and will support continuous farming on the property. That's not the problem. The historical buildings and farm vistas, they are to be preserved. And herein lies all of the issues that generated the need for this 2-year study. There's 15 old, mostly historic buildings. You can't have 15 buildings and not use them and not expect to have some problems. And amongst our principles is, without an active use, a building dies. It simply cannot be maintained. So a productive use is necessary to generate value, both hard value in terms of rental income, as well as soft value in terms of community appreciation, enjoyment, pleasure. So if we're going to use it, it means we need to repair them, we need to improve them, we need to maintain them, and we need to manage them. That's what's needed in the long run. And we have to be fiscally responsible.
Is there anything?
Is it?
It is. Well, volume up. Hang on.
Your account microphone's on, Dennis.
How's that? Okay, thank you. And we have to be fiscally responsible. And it sounds like we also should be low tech. Okay.
Dennis, let me just interrupt you. Does that mean that we're broadcasting now? No?
Yes, we have been since the beginning of the meeting.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Just couldn't hear you in the beginning.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we must find community-supported productive uses for these buildings. It's all about finding uses for the buildings and making that affordable. And their uses have to be compatible with farming. We said that's a given. It has to be compatible with the historical nature of this natural, pure public land. So that means community support means the community has to access it, use it, and appreciate it. Productive means it has to generate revenue. And compatible, we have to respect historical character, respect the natural setting, retain scenic farm vistas, and have recreational public use without huge waves of people. There's been proposals for various uses that would just be incompatible with this site. So the project resources, the approach we took, we have worked with the Vision Young Architecture and Real Estate. Thank you, Jennifer Stark, to help us with project management. We've worked with Seller Dreary Architecture, who has extensive experience in this area, particularly with community-owned properties and planning and historical structures. The S&D team was extended to include real estate market analysts, structural engineers, landscape design and planning experts, and cost estimating experts. They provided professional and objective analysis of buildings, their conditions, the feasible uses, the designs, and what that would cost. professional and objective market-based demand side analysis. What uses could we envision that would actually be attractive to the community, and professional site plans. So with that, it's time to turn this portion over to Doug Seller of Seller Brewery.
Great. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll look at the screen. And so I'm going to just give a quick overview. I'll probably won't cover things in depth, maybe how you'd like to see it, but I'll try to cover most of the bases. So let's go to the next slide, Dennis. So the first one is, I think what's different in this effort from prior years really is a holistic approach. It came out of discussing with the ad hoc group, how should it be approached? And it began as a building master plan, and it became obvious you can't talk about buildings without understanding how the site might interact with them. And you can't talk about either without understanding the market and what makes sense economically in the region. So this team that Dennis mentioned, we brought it together. The one he didn't mention was historic preservation specialist, Bob Powers out of Philadelphia, to help with the issues of National Register nomination, the process, how that might be structured, the pros and cons. We studied the buildings and developed uses. We verified these uses based on a market analysis, and then we created plans to try to allow that to happen. Next. So I've got three parts to this. The first one, I'll talk about the buildings. There's 15 buildings in total, as Dennis said. When you read the National Register language, they technically say it's 14 buildings and 2 structures, but smaller buildings are called structures, apparently. There's 44,000 square feet. I think surprisingly to some of this, most of them are structurally sound. Those that aren't, they're pretty localized things that we've identified what they are. One was derelict. These buildings were typically constructed as needs arose. Like Dennis said, the farming history, you know, you needed a corn crib, you needed a place for hay, you needed a place for equipment. But what came out of it is an understanding that there's residences, 2 large ones and a small cottage, 2 large Pennsylvania standard barns, and then specialized structures. Next, Dennis. This is just an example. Every building was digitally surveyed and with tapes and with scanning. We drew elevations and plans. Next, Dennis, of every building, this being the Jenny Brown house. Next. This is an example of the dating based on looking at the buildings and reading the data that we have. I think when we began the report, I thought, maybe the ad hoc committee thought, we would finally answer the question as to what's the date of every building. And I think it became clear what's needed here is an overview, and that when you dig into the actual nuts and bolts of doing your nomination and other things, then is when you'll write historic structure reports and truly understand what's what and when. But there is a chronology. This is an example. We did that for both farmsteads. We looked at it as 2 farmsteads, you know, separately. Satterthwaite was the structural analysis. Essentially, the large barn F5 on the left, that's rated as 4 because the foundation could use some work. The work you did in a number of years ago on the upper level was quite good and is sound. The corn crib there is the only derelict building on the site. Next. Forward Planning is a land use economics firm in Philadelphia. They've been doing it for decades now. They did a quite extensive study that I'm just going to touch on, but they looked at quantitative factors, population, income. I'll show you a couple examples of how they understood kind of the what's here. Then they looked at qualitative factors by interviewing people, third-party research and interviews of possible similar institutions or organizations. And then they worked with census data and other data sites that they have to sort of build a model for us. The the way it worked in this project, it kind of didn't start this way, but it became clear. Todd Poole did an analysis of the market, and we did a parallel analysis of the buildings. And at some point around July, August, we started blending them together. Again, market analysis, demand, supply, and then find the opportunities. Next. I won't go too much here, but Todd Poole probably had 70 pages of exhibits that sort of support his work, but essentially he has what he calls a primary market area, which is 15 minutes, and then a secondary market area. And it's based on understanding the Delaware Valley, especially Bucks County, and how it reaches into New Jersey. Next, Dennis. So I won't dwell on this. There'll be a report that you all can dig into and really sort of study it when we produce the final document. He spoke about tourism regions, which that map showed, but his key findings are millions of dollars are being spent annually in Bucks County. It's a very visitor-rich county, so you've got a base to build on. People coming here want galleries, historic sites, restaurants. They want things to do. The bottom point is interesting, is that baby boomers focus on food and activities. Gen Xers, family-oriented. Millennials want cool things to do on a budget. And Gen Zs will do things. So they'll go off on a lark. They would visit this place in a heartbeat, he feels, because it's something cool to do. Next. He studied models for agricultural heritage type, living history museums, places where barns are rented, where buildings are used. Next, Dennis. He studied arts organizations that do either teaching or hold events, or kind of the types of things that would fit on a farmstead, say as either Patterson or Satterthwaite. And then he spent time talking about governance. How is a township-owned property managed in the best way? And there's a curatorship model, there's a 501c3 model, and then there's a couple others that he studied. But he probably looked at 4 examples of each of those in addition to individual interviews. Next, Dennis. So I hate to say it, that's all for that part, but believe me, it was pretty impressive, I thought. On the site, again, we had 5 guiding principles. We felt that the non-agricultural easement area should be a public asset. You should develop it in a way that public can come in there to discourage them from wandering around the farming fields, getting hurt, disturbing farm operations. We felt strongly about separating vehicular flow, farmer flow, township truck flow, and visitor flow from pedestrians. Provide access to the natural areas that came out of the focus group so clear. Birders want a bird, people want to walk on trails, get to the ponds. And number 4, I felt very strongly about that whatever plan we put together can be done. It's not pie in the sky. It doesn't say, for instance, let's move the compost pile. Well, maybe someday, but not for starters. Or let's put trails around the perimeter, not with the easement requirements. Maybe you can negotiate limited stuff, but we wanted to keep it based in reality. And then we understood that each farmstead has a unique identity, and we started to lean towards arts education for Patterson, and ag heritage is kind of an umbrella term for Satterthwaite. Next. So this is a site analysis that shows the current roads in essentially from Mirror Lake. Primarily, it's a loop between the 2 sites. It's got a one-way component to it. It's awkward at best. It has all the collisions we talked about, and it's confusing. Next, please. This is a concept plan where the idea is the blue line that Dennis is marking there is a farmer's road. We're suggesting to open the historical road onto Langhorne Yard Road through the woods. We have a cost estimate for that under the site component, and that each farmstead is its own dead-end entry path. So you go to either Satterthwaite or Patterson based on where you're going, and that the 2 sites are linked with trails within the non-easement area that also link to sidewalks along Mirror Lake and to the neighborhood across the street. Next, Dennis. So if you zoom in on Satterthwaite a little bit, one of the unique things about this is, well, there's several things, but one is composting is, it's part of the township's what you do. It takes a certain amount of dimension. There's a value to why it's there. You've invested in detention, different things. It could move someday, but we didn't recommend that as your first dollars is to move a composting operation. It's working fine. But we worked with the township that we can push it back a little bit. So, and then the trucks are a real issue. Right now, they zoom right down the middle. The idea is to have access in, so the dark gray is pedestrians that would, or people that would come in and use the park. And you can see there's a gated area where Dennis has his arrow now. Trucks in that seasonal October, November, when it's like 45 trips a day, they're coming in there, doing their thing. And what this does is it keeps the farm component to the south of the barn and some of those buildings as a public pedestrian space that links to trails. And it seems to give sort of the optimal use. And then the other observation on the site is the Satterthwaite house of all the buildings is the one that probably could be separated from the rest of the site without compromising these big goals that Dennis outlined at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a dotted line around there for Satterthwaite. It's a fairly small parcel, but, and then we studied, we'll talk about the building use analysis in a sec, but we studied each of the farmsteads pretty intensely. I think that's it for this farm. So let's go to Patterson. But before you go, this is an overview of what Satterthwaite would look like. If you see that open area to the below the barn, we're proposing to tear down the corn crib because it's derelict, and at some point erect a shed on the other side of that open area and then the barn on the lower level could be a pop-up space for coming out and having flea markets, little events, kind of cool things that aren't giant weddings, they aren't rock festivals, but things that are appropriately scaled. Next. Patterson, similar idea that you come down the road from Mirror Lake. At some point you widen to 2 lanes, but we don't want to bring cars into that area except, you know, the dark gray is where primary parking is, you loop, you leave. But if you're making a delivery to a building or you're, you know, handicapped and need to get closer or have a reason, there is sort of limited access drive around. The interior portions, pedestrian. We'll talk about uses later, but that you can see the farm road loops around. On this site in particular, we're suggesting fence it to keep people, because the type of uses that are there, artists like to paint, they like to walk out into the cornfields, and farmers, that can be dangerous. We're not saying it's all arts use, but it could have an arts crafts type of flavor to it. Next, please, Dennis. And that's what Patterson looks like from the air. Next. So that slide before, so the feasible uses and costs. This was kind of where Todd Poole, the economist and the architect, came together. You can go to the next slide, Dennis. And this first 2 slides are what I called the consultant's pick, which surprisingly I didn't get too much grief on this from the ad hoc committee. And I think it's in part because the whole report's written as an a la carte approach that gives you options for every building for the site, presents the logic in the background with the intention that it's not a document that stays alive and you change over time. And so these were sort of practical suggestions, which I'm actually not going to dwell on too much now because I'm probably running out of time. But you know, I'm going to talk to you about 3 buildings within here, the 2 houses, P4, which is a yellow one in the middle, which I think could become public toilet rooms. My goal is that each farmstead becomes a trailhead. So if you're live in the community and you want to walk on a trail, you could come to Patterson, find a bathroom, find an information kiosk, and walk, and do the same at Satterthwaite. And then I'm going to talk about P7, which is a building that could be multi-purpose community room for use by your Parks and Rec, by AOI if they're operating, or anybody for community use. Next, Dennis. That was the same for Satterthwaite, but we'll just skip over this. So I'm going to show you several building examples to show you the logic of the report, but not to get lost in the details too much. So each building had 2 or 3 options. In the case of the Satterthwaite house, 6 options. And then the darkened version there, that's the consultant's pick for what I would do if I was king for a day. And then we have, if you go to the next slide, Dennis, there's a capital, the revenue assumptions that sort of generated, like, where is this revenue coming from, what the assumptions were, the type of uses, what the square footage might be, what that might generate. We had a similar thing for the capital improvements. And then next slide, Dennis. The capital improvements, each building has a spreadsheet that's costed for its options. And then we broke out what I called near-term costs, which is what I should say you should address in the first 5 years, because they're structural, practical, utility-based, or something. They're not putting uses in it. They're just making it a good vanilla box and real estate lingo. And then from that, the ad hoc group did their stage 1 costs, which you see in red there. So let me just walk you through the buildings with that. And then each building, of course, has a plan that shows its proposed use. So you can go, you can keep going. That's the Janney House plans. So the equipment garage, it's another building. I'm suggesting that it be a community space that's used for meetings, for events, for lectures, for anything, kind of pop-up community functions for teaching. Next. As a plan, you can see, it's just an open space that opens out and gets people into that village space. One of the things we realize is that if you bring more than one use to a community, it helps the other businesses thrive. And that's the idea of why I think this is an important building. Caretaker house we studied because we studied all of them, but for tonight I'm showing it because Dennis mentioned the residences might be of interest. This could be the oldest. It's one of the oldest structures, the stone portion. The building on the left, the addition is 1950s, I believe. Next. And it has a plan. The recommendation for this is to keep it as an artist studio. It's a very small apartment. The cost to fit it out, to convert it to apartment, is fairly high for the revenue you get. And when you look at the revenue against the costs and all that, that's partially why I made the recommendations that I do. Next, please. In a garage. Next, please, Dennis. This is the one that could be public bathrooms. In the meantime, it could just remain storage space and you could collect a little rent for it or use it for township use. Next. Satterthwaite's house. So there's 6 options for this, where the first 3 involve long-term lease or selling it, such as a bed and breakfast. I believe Todd kept the large animal vet in the mix because he studied it. We had that information, but we didn't take it too seriously. And then B&B, and someone could use it as a house or a business if they bought it. Next, please. But the ones that kind of perhaps options 3, 4, 5, and 6 are different uses where a nonprofit might use it for educational purposes. It could be leased to an engineer or a business like a lawyer, or it could be a mixed use where there's a residence upstairs and a sort of an educational nonprofit use downstairs. Next, please, Dennis. These plans show the mixed use development on 2 floors. Next. Satterthwaite Barn. Again, I'm going to show you the plan of the lower level. You can go to the next slide, Dennis. Partially because this building provides the trailhead function for bathrooms on the left, township storage for Parks and Rec or what have you on a portion to the right. But what's intriguing is the idea that this could serve that community space as sort of pop-up uses for all kinds of things that could be really in tune with what the community wants to do. Next. I think that's my last slide. So hopefully I didn't take too long, and it's not very detailed, but that's my overview.
Thank you, Doug. And as you can see, the committee had a number of options for each building as well as for the site, together with costs and potential revenues that would allow us to make some of those trade-offs. And we made those trade-offs, and we've made those recommendations. So let's get into those specific recommendations. Uses based upon Cellar Drury compatible use, forward planning, market demand analysis. The committee closed in on low impact uses, avoid high volume of traffic. There were proposals for wedding venues or spirits, whiskey distilleries and those kinds of things. And those were not accepted because of the impact on the site, interference with farming operations, potentially with the scenery, as well as the impact on the close neighborhoods. Visual arts is certainly an area of focus, and trades and crafts. It's very compatible with the site. It's very compatible with agriculture and history. There is a foundation there already. And also there was identified many synergistic opportunities between regional art organizations and programs and potential new art offerings that could be made via community events and others. It's consistent with farming, and certainly we heard a strong community interest in that kind of experience. It also can be a home for a nonprofit organization that to manage the property and take responsibility for the property. Nature access, trails, education, whether that's education on nature or on agriculture or on history, and a agricultural heritage center at Satterswaith is what seemed to make the most sense to this committee. So the vision that was created for Patterson Farm, and excuse me, but I'll simply read it, that the Patterson Farm is 234 acres of land that stands out from the surrounding highways and suburbs because of its unique and beautiful features. It's like an oasis with farm fields, trees, ponds, and wildlife. The farm is also home to 2 historic Pennsylvania Quaker farmsteads, which are important to our past and important to our community today. People use and appreciate this special place for growing food, creating art, finding inspiration, and providing education. The land is incredibly fertile soil that has been farmed for over 300 years without interruption. That's what we want this to be. We want it to be a destination. That's in, if you look at a brochure for Bucks County, in addition to New Hope and playhouses and covered bridges, you see Patterson Farm in Lower Makefield Township. So the cost estimates to execute this, a couple comments on that. The cost estimates that Cellar Drury developed are sound, are backed by fact, but they're also a little bit artificial because they're based on the completion of the vision all at once. Everything's done now. And it's all done on the basis of LMT doing it with your requirements of bidding and multiple bids and government, union labor, et cetera. That's not realistic. That's not how it will be done. But if it were done that way, we're talking in the range of $5 million or so to bring this asset, a site up to use. The reality will be different. We can eat an elephant one bite at a time. The future stages will build on the successes and the failures of stage 1. And if we succeed with stage 1, if we execute stage 1, that'll change some of the conditions and priorities. So we didn't want to get too caught up in stage 2, stage 3. What is the ultimate use of that one particular building? Let's get it into condition in stage 1 where we can envision that use and make those decisions. So sound execution has to focus on what can be accomplished in the near term while keeping an eye on this final destination, this vision. And certainly if it were managed by a nonprofit, that could alter those expenses significantly. So we focused on stage one, years 1 to 3, in order to provide a solid base on which other stages could build. There are 7 stage 1 priorities that the committee has decided that are executable, tangible progress to realize this vision. 1, management of the property by a dedicated, focused nonprofit that can fundraise, win more grants than could the township, and use community volunteers. We had 2 consistent, strong recommendations from professionals in all directions. 1, municipal governments are not organized nor structured to manage such properties. It's a well-known fact. It's not particular to LMT. It's a fact around the country. You don't have to talk to too many experts to hear that stated. Number 2, a dedicated, focused nonprofit who can fundraise, request grants, stimulate community interest and volunteers, and manage the site is how the vast majority of these sites are managed today. The successful sites that we included in our studies were all run in essence that way. Our second of 7 recommendations is that we make a submission to register this site on the National Register of Historical Places. To that end, I'm now going to introduce my colleague, Joe Camarata, who's a committee chair who led the charge on a case study in the nonprofit management, as well as in the national registration process. So, Joe?
Is this on? Yeah, good. Thanks, Dennis. As Dennis mentioned, we start to look at governance models for Patterson Farm for the implementation of the master plan. And we did so by reaching out and talking to other organizations which had gone through a similar process. So there's a farm up in New Hampshire that we spoke to that was managed by a nonprofit, also one in Connecticut. We spoke to Langhorne Heritage Farm here in Bucks County, where the ground is actually owned by the municipality, but managed by the nonprofit. We also spoke to Rose Valley, Thunderbird Lodge at Rose Valley, where it was owned by the municipality, municipality, but it was given then to the nonprofit. So we all wanted to find out a little bit from each of them how the governance worked, what was the relationship back to the municipality, and how did they work together. We also had a great discussion with the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, PHMC. We spoke with the person there who was responsible for their what they call their managed sites. So PHMC owns a number of historical sites around the state, but they don't manage all of those sites. They have management agreements with nonprofits. So we had a conversation about what makes that successful. And they also gave us a number of good examples of agreements between the state and the nonprofit that we could look at. So what I'd like to touch on today is what are the key learnings for nonprofit success? I'll go through that quickly. There's a report, a more detailed report that will be in your package. What would be selection criteria and how to support a nonprofit? And then, as I mentioned, there's a set of agreements. I'm not going to go into the agreements today, but we're going to touch on the National Register. So some of the key learnings is public engagement and involvement in the historic site is really crucial. And this was really interesting to me because there were 2 reasons, one of them which I never actually thought of. One is that because when applying for grants, that either it's a state grant or private grant, to be able to demonstrate that there's public interest and how the public interacts and engages with the sites is important in that grant success. I'll give you an example. We, the Historical Commission, we applied for a grant, a Keystone Construction grant for Slate Hill Cemetery last year. But we had no way of knowing how many people went through Slate or engaged with Slate Hill or walked through Slate Hill. We didn't know. We didn't get the grant. And one of the reasons that PHMC told us was that we couldn't demonstrate a public interest in the site. Now, we've addressed that this year, but that's another story. So public engagement is important for that reason, but it's also the public then through their donations will provide the matches that are necessary for these grants. Hardly any of these grants are 100%. It might be a 50-50 match. So by having the public engaged, by getting donations from the public, you have money then to match either state funds or private funds. Also was interesting when I asked the historic farms how they started their renovation efforts, they basically said they started with the farmhouse. And they found multiple ways of using that farmhouse in order to generate revenue. In case of all three of the farms, they actually used it as an apartment for a caretaker who did some local maintenance around the property, the immediate property, not the farm as a whole. They also used some of the buildings as some of the rooms as small meeting rooms, for hosting birthday parties or anniversary parties. They said that because everyone's working from home, there's companies that are looking for interesting meeting spaces too, and they use it for that. And then there's some of the more traditional uses like house tours. So the farmhouses were a great way for them to get, for the nonprofits to get started and get started generating revenue. They host educational programs and curate exhibits in the barns and other outbuildings. So it, could be a collection of agricultural tools or tools. It could be artwork, but the outbuildings were largely used for holding education. Sometimes the nonprofit put the education on itself. Sometimes they just had artisans coming in that would rent the space from them in order to hold an educational program in those buildings. Volunteers were a key source of expertise and skills, not only for managing the nonprofit, but for sweat equity for preserving a building. The one that I mentioned, the farm up in Connecticut, they had a whole barn that was given to them all the pieces. And it was actually through volunteers that they went out, they got relationships with the local builders to provide the necessary construction material they needed. And they had volunteers come in and actually raise the whole barn and put the barn up. That was all done without any expense at all. And then the last point is that the board and staff selections should be based on expertise and the ability to contribute, not based on relationships. So that kind of brings us into what were some of the selection criteria and support for nonprofit. And this was, driven by all of the nonprofits, but it was also PHMC weighed in heavily here too. So first of all, they said you have to have a close working relationship between the township and the nonprofit. They have to be on the same page. And I think the master plan is a great tool in order to get that to occur. You needed to find a nonprofit that had adequate financial resources or a really well-defined plan on how to get those resources, because without resources, you really, and resources mean both funds, means both money as well as people. They suggested a professional paid staff and at least one FTE that's experienced in either museum management or management of historic sites and program development. A sustainable board of directors that survives the loss of one or two key individuals. And then, of course, the ability to engage and manage volunteers to support the preservation efforts, because most of these preservation efforts was actually done through volunteers. I'm not going to talk much about the agreements. We could talk about that a little bit later. The second point that I'd like to talk about is a submission to the National Register for Historic Places. And I'm sure you know this already. I'll just go through real quick. What are the benefits of being listed on the National Register? Well, probably one of the most important ones is the prioritization for funds from both state and federal grants. Recognition and prestige is important for private historic preservation grants. You can increase public awareness, and if you should go towards a private ownership model, then the federal tax credits come into play. Doug mentioned that we had a historic preservation specialist come in and look at the buildings, and his recommendation was that a nomination should be submitted early in the planning process. And the reason is as we think about preserving the buildings, that we have to establish what we call a period of significance for the farm, and that any modification should be made to be in alignment with that period of significance. So the sooner that gets done, the better, right? And then they also recommended that we engage the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office into various strategies to bring the Patterson Farm onto the National Register. So what I like from this evening, and we can discuss it now or we could discuss it at the end, is I like authorization for the Historical Commission to move forward with the submission of Patterson Farm to the National Register by completing the following items. There's something called a determination of eligibility, which is the property eligible to be on the National Register? This determination of eligibility was done back in 1998, I think, for Patterson Farm, when the new ramp was put into 95. It just needs to be renewed. They need to be renewed every 5 years. So we'd like to be able to update that and renew it. So it has a determination of eligibility. We'd like to engage this State Historic Preservation Office to look at 3 possible strategies for listing Patterson Farm on to the National Register. One is to list the farmsteads separately. One is to combine them into their own historic district. And the third is to extend the existing Edgewood Village Historic District, which abuts the farm, to also include the farm. There could be pros and cons to each of those approaches, and we'd like to come back to you with a recommendation then on how to proceed with the National Register submission. And I think that's everything for me.
Thank you, Joe. That's important work to help us make this tangible in terms of how you create a relationship with a nonprofit to manage the property. And as you said, we'll come back to the National Registry. So a third priority in the stage 1 that we're recommending is necessary water abatement to keep the buildings dry. Certainly selected roofs, some gutters, and paint all, if not most, if not all of the buildings. That's also an element of water abatement. It's to slow the deterioration. It's to also create visible improvement. It's amazing how much benefit one can see when a place is painted and kept up. Now that will require light carpentry. You're not going to paint over rotten wood, but that's what the committee saw as a very early stage 1 to help show a change in direction. Environmental cleanups, certainly we need to remove any concerns that would regarding volunteers working on the site. So that has to be a stage 1 priority. We have included the known environmental issues in our cost estimates that we're aware of based on lead paint on the exterior of Satterswaith and some asbestos in Satterswaith. But the township does have additional studies coming in that will be in later this month that might expand that expense. We just don't know that right now, but the environmental cleanups would be an important priority. Certainly improving the farmer access and improving public access at the same time is very important. Right now, as if you recall some of Doug's schematics of the site, today the farmer drives right in between the buildings on these driveways. That's how they were designed. That's what happens. If you've ever driven large agricultural equipment, you'll notice very quickly you can't see what's in front of you well. It's made to be out in an open field, not worried about being in the public, and so we need to separate that access. The new farmer access that's recommended in this plan is the original driveway to the Patterson Farm. We're restoring the original historic driveway. The driveway to Mirror Lake was a recent addition. So by improving the farmer access, we can give them support, which is necessary, and then also comfortably improve the access to the public. And also to begin, not to build, but to at least design the nature trail. That we heard it so many times in so many meetings, nature trail, nature trail, nature trail. It's in our stage 1. And then also to ready some of the first rung lease opportunities. We can get in stage 1, get the property into the right mode of access, looking better, some of the fundamental improvements, water abatement, light structural, first rung structural issues, then we're ready for stage 2. So here's the cost sheet that the committee used. I'm gonna pause, bless you, pause just a little bit on this first one to explain it. Through the cost estimations of Seller Drury, we have estimates for each element of the project. We had considered, I think it was 36 different elements that the committee thought should rise to the top for consideration of stage one. And of those 36, we selected approximately half of those. So of the 10 elements that we thought would fit stage one or necessary for stage one that are common to the whole site, not particular to one farmstead or the other. Of those 10, 3 of them received support from 7 out of 7 members of the committee. So there was unanimous agreement that these 3 elements, that the property be managed by a Friends of Patterson Farm Foundation as a placeholder, that by a nonprofit, that a new farmer driveway access to Yardley Langhorne Road be established, and the engineering and the design of a nature trail be established. Those 3, everyone agreed should be in stage one. The light green is an element of the project where 6 out of the 7 committee members felt strongly that should be included, like the new farmer drive around Patterson Farmstead and the Patterson Farm listed on a national registry, that those should be included as well. Our stage one recommendations are these 2 green boxes. But to help the board with your decision-making and trying to make trade-offs of expense versus benefit, we've shown you the other elements that got support from 5 out of 7 members, 4 out of 7 members, 3 members, or 1 or 2 or less. So we tried to consider all those things that were rational in stage one and then narrowed those down. And so as you look at these numbers, that's kind of the decision aid tool for you. So if we then look at the stage one recommendations for Patterson Farm per se, there were 3 elements in Patterson Farm totaling $50,000 that everyone agreed needs to be there. The Jenny House repair and paint, the rolled wood sills and fix the paint and dormers, $30,000. Initial landscaping, tree trimming, and address the current tenant lease terms, $10,000 in legal. Those were real high on the top, and second was the paint all buildings. So again, I don't want to walk through these here tonight, but you can see this model that we've used. In Satterswaith, 2 items were unanimous to be included in stage one: paint and the necessary carpentry for painting, and the environmental and soil remediation, of course. And then a couple items right behind that. So in stage one recommendations, if we look at the dollar estimates for the common to site, Patterson Farmstead and Satterswaith Farmstead, it's about $250,000 that this committee says is core. It's really fundamental, needs to do. And our preference and our recommendation is all of the dark green and the light green, which is about $530,000 of expenditure. So stage one, years 1 to 3, about 533,000. As I've said before, it's based on current township bidding and costing requirements. It's focused on getting the buildings dry and taking care of environmental issues. And we recognize that stage one will largely depend on LMT expenditures, with the goal of getting the buildings and the site into condition where they could be turned over to a nonprofit management. And stage two, hopefully then with success, can become more reliant on a nonprofit organization with their funding. While we say that, I think it's important to also point out that the creation of a nonprofit and the working with the nonprofit is important to get underway in stage one. In order to pass the baton smoothly at the end of stage one, that organization needs to be up and running and have momentum and resources. And we've talked about some of the cost benefits. So let me just say a few things in closing. It's clear to this committee that with the township commitment and public engagement, this beautiful historical natural agricultural site can become a point of distinction and a source of pride and a true community resource to Lower Makefield Township. While the buildings and the site need work, they're not beyond repair. They're not beyond use. They can be salvaged. The community places high importance on this site because of its historical significance, cultural significance, open space, natural landscaping, scenic vistas, artistic inspiration. And it's also in this current environment where we know farm fields are being rapidly lost. The few farms that are left in the township are about to disappear, and our only agricultural land is preserved farmland. So this is important. Lower Makefield has invested at this point almost exactly $134,137, I think, dollars, and countless hours into developing a balanced, executable plan that's fiscally responsible. So expectations are high, but so's the community patience. The community wants some change, but the community also understands that'll take time. But they do want and need to see tangible directional change. That's what's going to be expected. So in our estimation, it's time to act, to break long-standing inertia that and create some positive momentum. And I think this board started that process by giving the ad hoc committee this assignment in the first place. And that's where we are today. And with the positive momentum, I think we're likely to be astonished as to just how much can be accomplished once we change that direction, once we take inertia and turn it into momentum and we show visible progress. The community will embrace this and get behind it. And so while we can say the community wants this and certainly express that to us, I also think from just a personal level, I think the community needs this. It's very easy to snipe and to be a critic and to look at what's wrong with an issue or what's not quite right with a plan or a topic. But progress is made by looking at what's right about it. There's a lot of right about this. And if we do this right, I think this is a resource that can help bring our community together. Look at the positives. This is for every generation. It's not just a sports field for a certain stage of family life. It's not, it's something that kids and adults and seniors can and will all enjoy. I think we need it. And I think it's very much in reach. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. So I wanted to clap and then I was like, do we clap? Because tremendous work. And yet we're just at the beginning, you know? So sometimes you save them for the end, but thank you for all that you've done. I don't know if the board wants to have some comment now. If you want to go right to the motions, go ahead, John.
If the chair would accept the motion, I would
Surely.
be, which is what I was just working on there. I move that the board authorize the Historical Commission to move forward with the submission of Patterson Farm to the National Register of Historic Places and engage the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office. And that 2, the board reaffirm its current 2023 and 2024 budget funding for phase 1 that's currently in the budget as we see right now. And 3, to direct the solicitor and township manager to develop a strategy for the formation of a nonprofit to manage Patterson Farm on a go-forward basis. Does that
I'm going
cover?
to suggest we do those separately.
Okay.
I think they're all great motions.
Yep.
They're pertinent to this, but I think we need to make sure the minutes and the record reflect
Sure.
the separation, but they're all related and what they are in sequence, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And just to confirm that even though some of them are not listed per se on the agenda, you're comfortable with them?
Yes, especially because they do relate to what was presented, and while it's not specific, I think the first two, I think, are certainly pertinent.
Yep.
I think the last one about the nonprofit, I think if we could certainly, I think, relate that to the presentation, the fact the materials were available, and the discussion certainly went in detail about that as well.
Great, then John, you want to try again?
I'll go again. Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion that the board authorize the Historical Commission to move forward with the submission of Patterson Farm to the National Register of Historic Places and engage the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office.
Second.
Thank you. Motion made by John, seconded by Dan, who has joined the meeting. With that, I'm going to open it up to comment, and I'm just going to start with one quick comment for myself, which is, protocol says that as a chair, you're not supposed to make motions or second motions, and this is a difficult time for me because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. So happy we have motions, but that's why I don't get to make them. So, James, you were writing furiously. Do you have something you wanted to?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so
Mostly doodling, but so just a quick question for Dave and I think for Joe as well. I think you mentioned the different options as far as the asking for the Patterson Farm to be acknowledged as a historic site. And then I think you broke it down into 3 different segments that we could look at. I guess the one question for me would be which one would be the most limiting as far as futures activity at the farm?
I think part of the application process would actually look into that. Is that would be my understanding. So you're not committing to one right now. You're actually committing to the process to submit and then work interactively with the Historic Commission to make the best determination.
Local commission will look at pros and cons of each and come back with a recommendation.
Right.
Okay. And then Dennis, you mentioned hard costs. What do you think ideally would be our revenue stream that we'd have to be able to maintain, and perhaps you could answer this question as well, in order for us to make this kind of a zero taxpayer impact for year, 3, 5, 10, 15, 30?
And in the various uses in those later stages that we have revenue estimates, and I'm not going to have them at the tip of my tongue, but the goal was, and the thinking of the committee was that the revenue generated has to, at minimum, pay for the maintenance of the buildings. I think with these kind of historical buildings and this kind of utilization, this is not a ROI type of thing. You're going to invest, a lot of money to bring back an old barn or whatever it is. The goal is that with the use, the community receives the soft benefits, and the hard revenue that you're referring to keeps the building in condition and pays and makes it not a burden from that point on. How much of that expense, the investment, is public money versus grant money versus other nonprofit money, that's a TBE to be determined based on where we stand at that time.
Okay.
But the goal was to always cover maintenance.
Okay. And then I think, Dave, probably for you, the last question would be current income from the existing farmer Charlene would be roughly what per year at this point? What
I believe it's a little bit shy of 25. I think it's like 24.6 or something of that nature.
5,000 a year?
A year, yes.
And that's
Yeah.
170 acres of farm?
That's what I understand, yes. Yep.
170 acres times $175 per. So whatever that math is, it's in the neighborhood of 25 grand.
You have the one guy to ask, how's that compare with leases with other farms in Lower Makefield?
It's the highest rate by far. Farmland preservation, on which I serve, our highest rate is $50 an acre versus 175.
Okay. That was all I had for now. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
John.
I have nothing for.
Oh, okay. You're late. Yeah, go ahead, Colin.
I was just going to say, for the purpose of this discussion, we should limit it to the scope of the current motion.
Right.
And just for a point of clarification, is the motion to authorize the Historical Commission to apply to the National Register of Historic Places or to renew the determination of eligibility?
Well, that's part of the submission for is the renewal. So that's why I put it in those frames. I use the words up there. But the determinant of eligibility, that's an every 5-year thing. It was done previously. We haven't updated that. So this is to make sure that we actually go through the full process.
Okay, and not having experience with the Historical Commission in the past,
Yeah.
has the Historical Commission managed the applications to the National Register in the past, or has that been managed by the township staff?
I mean.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, you,
Largely by the Historical Commission has done, I mean, the writing of it, the research of it, the writing of it, I mean, everything, because their property goes to the township for submission. But the Historical Commission has done the research on it.
Okay, I don't want to be pedantic, right? But is it appropriate to authorize the Historic Commission to support the township's application rather than to authorize the Historical Commission to make the application? I guess I am being pedantic.
I'll take it as a friendly amendment.
Sure, I'll make the friendly amendment that we authorize the Historical Commission to assist the township in the submission.
That's fine.
Can you accept that as well, Dan?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I second, yes.
Thank you.
Along those lines, the resources the Historical Commission has in terms of filling out that stuff is stuff that staff just doesn't have.
Yeah.
On it.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you.
We have some folks with encyclopedic knowledge of this stuff. So,
yeah, Joe's being modest as he sits here. He's an expert in that, so.
Dan? Yep.
Hang on. Thanks for the present. I did listen to it on the drive up from the airport. I apologize for being late. I guess in terms of this specific to the motion, I'm assuming, I was the liaison before. Oftentimes, a lot of this information is gathered by consultants, not because the township has asked them to, but because there's some PennDOT project nearby, and as part of the Section 106 process, they have to do these assessments and eligibility determinations, all that stuff. From my recollection, there's a fairly good file on Patterson Farm buildings because of previous PennDOT work. Is that still good?
When the new ramp was put in, the new on-off ramp at Newtown was a Section 106 review, and that was when the first determination of.
Yeah. So do you anticipate, based on that file review or that, what the previous work that's been done as part of the PennDOT work, we can piggyback that. There's been some other work done by township volunteers and staff over the years. Do you anticipate that the collection of that work will be sufficient to move ahead, or do you think we'll need to eventually have a Section 106 cultural resources consultant help us finish it to get it across the finish line?
I don't know about a Section 106. I think a lot of it depends upon strategy. So one of the reasons we want to update the determination of eligibility, because it'll allow us to have a conversation with SHPO regarding where we are with our documentation now and where we need to submit it to the national.
Joe, could you just be mindful of the mic? Thanks.
We'll understand that gap, but our thinking is to actually make the historical significance be based on the agricultural heritage of the farm. And there's been a lot of work that's been done by Dr. Hines in terms of researching that heritage, the crop yields from the farm in terms of comparison to other farms and things like that. I think if that's the approach that we could take, then I believe we have the data. If, as Doug pointed out earlier, if they come back and they want detailed information around the aging of the buildings, that might actually, we might actually require then to bring in some external expertise to help us with that.
Okay, so I just want to be mindful of that. I think it's a no-brainer to start the process because there's so much information that's been done, completed. It would be helpful if you could work with township staff to develop maybe a schedule and, just to make sure that information is provided to you all or staff in a timely manner, make sure everyone has access to everything you need. Then we can get regular feedback from PHMC, SHPO, the alphabet soup of those agencies in Pennsylvania. But otherwise, I think it's a great idea. So thank you.
Is there any public comment on the motion? On this motion? Thank you.
Yeah, can we get the
You can go
mic
to-
back?
You can go to that. Oh, there's not.
Thank you.
I think we got it.
So Tim Daly, Lower Makefield Township, and resident who lives kitty corner to Patterson Farm. So I just wanted to say what an amazing presentation, guys. Thank you very much. Very thorough. And for the 16 years I've been here, this is the first thing I've heard that I actually have felt positive about. So I think the remarks that Dave made about the entry into our community. So when I moved here in August 2007, I came off 95 and I was told, take a look at Newtown, take a look at Lower Makefield, great places. My first move was to take a right. I never went left. And it was because of the scenery, the cornrows, the fact that it was a community that was like the one that I grew up in upstate New York, which was very historic. And preserving that history is very important for, this community to have something that is a shared element that everyone takes with them. Because anytime I go home, I own my parents' home. So I have to go home every once in a while. And, where I grew up was where Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born and raised. It was the central point of the French and Indian War. And the man who ran the fort was the one who got the Indians to sign the treaty with the English to win the war against the French. I mean, those are things you always want to preserve. And we have many of those same things here. So it's wonderful to hear that these individuals are here in the work that you guys done. Thank you. Because every morning I wake up, I look out the window, I get to see the farm. And that was part of the reasons why I purchased my home in Yardley Hunt, is to be able to see that. So two things that I wanted to just add to it is that there has been a lot of conversations about development adjacent to the farm. And I think if you want to preserve the quality and the elements of the farm, you cannot put buildings adjacent to it that are not representative of the history. So if things come forward again regarding those adjacent properties, if you're going to make this investment, you should be rejecting any of those ideas coming forward. And for, to add one piece to your presentation of things to think about, I think the one thing that we did in the community I grew up is the schools and the clubs, and that brought us to these historic pieces in our community. The first schoolhouse in upstate New York, the oldest operating courthouse in the United States. All these things that we had, and that when I was 10, 12 years old, I didn't appreciate. But when you grow older, you do appreciate them. So I think one of the most important things you could think about, just to add more to your plan, how do you get to the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, 4-H clubs, field trips from the schools, things like that? Because the way that you're going to keep this bustling is to have the young kids come in, have that as their memories, so that when they come back, they're going to bring their kids to it as well. So thank you for all your work, guys.
Thank you. Any more public comment on the motion? And the motion, just as a reminder, is about the application. You want to speak to the application? Great.
Robert Abrams, 652 Teach Drive. Not sure if there's any equipment left over. Maybe a small museum with like $1 entry fee just to keep the museum going. Might be something that will draw more people.
Thank you. Any other public comment on the motion?
I do have one caller online, Suzanne.
Thank you. Hi, can you state your name? And if you're a resident of the township?
Kathleen, you're now here on the board. Never mind, we lost her.
Does the caller want to make a comment on the pending motion about the application?
She's not there anymore, so you're good.
Okay. All right. We'll be talking about this for a bit. Okay, then with that, if there's no more further comment, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. John.
Madam Chair, the next two motions, just for technical purposes, I know everybody's gonna, if I have to do this. I think we first have to make a motion to add each one to the agenda, and then as each one is added to the agenda, then have the subsequent motion subsequently made, and then go that way, just for Sunshine Act purposes. And also, I guess tomorrow, the agenda has to be posted with those additions on the agenda. So.
Okay, so to be clear, John's gonna make a motion to add something to the agenda. Assuming that passes, then we're gonna move on that motion and then there'll be, okay, go ahead, John.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend our agenda to include the discussion of allocation of funds in 2023 and 2024 for Patterson Farm.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Any public comment on adding the motion to the agenda? Hearing none. Call the question. All those in favor of adding the motion to the agenda signify by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. John?
They want to make the motion.
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that reaffirm that I move that the township or the board reaffirm its 2024 allocation of actually, maybe I should pardon me if I gotta rephrase this. Scratch that, let me start again. I move that the township. That's even better.
David's in on it.
Madam Chair, I move that the board reaffirm its decision to allocate funds toward Patterson Farm in years 2023 and 2024 in the total amount of $833,000, but $533,000 allocated into the appropriate 2024 budget fund for Patterson Farm. I think that's all of it, right?
Is
Yeah,
it?
and I'd be happy to provide some just additional sort of
second
context.
Wait,
Yeah,
do that? You're gonna do this.
I'll second. to
Thank
open
you,
the
Colin.
discussion.
Go ahead, Dave, if you wanna.
Okay, so I just wanted to make a note that, obviously you've not adopted a budget for 2024 at this point. But as currently constructed, the motion that was made is generally consistent with the draft. So if you recall, the board previously allocated $300,000 to the effort that is being undertaken now, as well as funds for the environmental remediation that's to be done on the site. And so the current budget contemplates that, and then the current draft 2024 budget contemplates the addition of the 533 in phase one cost. Again, as Dennis had indicated, they may not be entirely expended within 2024, depending on progress on those issues. I think those stage one costs were defined as year 1 through 3. However, again, the draft budget, which again has not been adopted but is being contemplated, does take proceeds from the 2016 bond issue to pay for both the $300,000 that was previously allocated to this effort and then the 533. So there is funds available for capital projects that align with the motion that Supervisor Lewis has made in both the current adopted 23 budget as well as the 24 budget. The only difference related to 2023 would be my recommendation to use these bond proceeds to pay for those expenses versus using either liquid sanitary sewer sale proceeds or American Rescue Plan Act dollars to preserve flexibility for use of those dollars in 2024.
Just as an aside note, I know Supervisor McCartney had asked some of the technical details related to use of the 2016 bond funds. That was reviewed by bond counsel and approved as acceptable under the terms of that bond agreement.
It's also consistent with the ballot referendum that was adopted by the voters in 2008, I believe, which related to both the acquisition of open space and the improvement to real property for open space purposes. Obviously, this is a large open space holding of the township, and these are structures that are being improved on that open space.
Thank you.
I guess this motion here is really voting on the budget's where it really matters, right?
Yeah.
So this is sort of a affirmation that, yes, as part of the budget process, this is where we're leaning. So it gives you direction.
Direction, yeah.
It's not, I wouldn't say it's necessary for us to vote on this right now. because we're gonna essentially vote on it again for the budget, but I understand why you're making the motion. I'm not gonna vote against it for that reason. I just wanna make sure we all understand.
Yep, yeah.
Colin, anything from you?
Yeah, if I could ask, so using the 300 out of the bond proceeds, which was not previously contemplated,
Mhm.
does that in this fiscal year require a vote of this board? Or do you have the authority to expend those funds from those bond proceeds without a vote of the board?
I mean, a vote regarding that issue may be appropriate. It'll just sort of clarify the intention. Again, when that commitment was made, obviously I wasn't physically present. I don't know that there was a specific funding source that was indicated. There may have been, it could have been sanitary sewer proceeds. It could have been American Rescue Plan Act monies. But again, my recommendation is in the interest of preserving flexibility of those funds for other uses in 2024.
Right.
These are permitted uses of those funds consistent with both the ordinance that authorized the incurrence of that debt and also consistent with the 2008 bond or voter referendum on this open space issue.
So when we're through all of this, we need to make a motion to add that to the agenda and then,
No, I would think that the current motion covers that because we've given him direct authorization for what 2023 and 2024 budget planning included 23 in his motion. Yeah.
okay,
That's why I put both.
But it's largely ceremonial, but important.
perfect. Good. Just want to make sure we're covered.
So we're good? Any public? Yes. Any public comment? Hearing none, I call the question. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. You got one more, John?
Madam Chair, at the risk of butchering another one of these, but first I'd like to make a motion to amend our current agenda, to add an agenda item discussing strategies for the formation of a nonprofit to manage Patterson Farm. This is
Second.
the agenda part.
Second. Okay. Any discussion from the board?
We had a second, was it Mr. Supervisor
It was
Grenier?
me. I
I'm
broke
sorry,
the
okay, that's fine.
That I just.
By the way, Robert's rules don't prohibit you from.
I
making
know,
motions
it's like
yourself.
it's like a pro forma thing, but
And nothing else does either, but I get that.
I get it. Okay. Any discussion from the board? Any public comment? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye, and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to direct the township manager and solicitor to develop a strategy for the formation of a nonprofit to manage Patterson Farm.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion from, John made the motion, Colin seconded. Is there any discussion from the board?
Yeah, this is generally just to keep the process started and start about sort of things like what would the charter of the nonprofit be? What would subsequent lease agreements be? What are the some of the provisions that were discussed previously included potential clawbacks for non-performance. We've talked about these things in other lease agreements that we've dealt with over the years in other circumstances. So we have some of that in the background, but that's the intent here is just start that process. And so we probably won't have much before the end of this year, but it's just kicking off that process and authorizing them to start it.
Excuse me. In terms of forming a nonprofit versus working with some existing nonprofit that might also be able to do that, that might be.
That would be included in
That would
the,
be.
yeah. So if you were thinking to make it, because there are a couple options there that perhaps if you were thinking of an amendment to say that to develop a strategy for the formation of a nonprofit or use of existing nonprofits to manage parts of Patterson.
I would, I would look at that as I would request that as an amendment just to keep.
I would take
in-
that.
in-
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
Except sadly enough, we would have to go back and amend what we added to the agenda, and I'm not really interested in
Well, I don't,
accepting that as a friendly amendment.
I don't think we have to change the
Yeah,
agenda.
You're probably close enough within the parameters of what you added to the agenda. So, I mean, I know we're getting several levels down, but I think we're still within the spirit of that. And the whole purpose of this is notice to everybody, and the whole purpose, as I understand, is investigate the process for eventually engaging a nonprofit.
Mhm.
So it's whether existing to be determined, that all that should be encompassed. So.
Go ahead, Dennis.
If I could, I think what you're describing, John and Dan, is the creation of or selection of a nonprofit.
That's a very simple way to say it.
Yeah.
Better than we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
And the reason I bring that up is there are some very well-established nonprofits that do this type of, I'll say land management, but other management too, that we may be a leverage. That's all.
Colin, did you accept the amendment?
I accept the amendment.
Okay. Any other comment from the board? Any other public comment? With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Can we just knock off the last motion, John, since you're doing so well?
It was already, I think.
Yeah, I think that was combined.
That was combined in the first motion.
First motion, yeah.
Oh, was it ultimately?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it talks about the submission to the Historic Commission.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, then with that, is there any more public comment? Okay, then we're moving along. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all the hard work. Look forward to the future with you. We are on to
Thank you.
agenda item number 7. There's a fire call. There's a fire call. Wherever you'd like. You can sit. You warmed the mic up.
I know.
So do we want to start with motions, or do we want to just let him start telling us what we're working on?
Whatever your preference is, we can do either. We can provide. I don't know if you want Tim maybe to provide some
Okay.
context.
Can we
on-
take down the Patterson Farm presentation from the projector? Thank you. We do love it. All right, so why don't you tee up agenda item number, letter A for us, consider authorization to advertise an ordinance regulating the use and display of fireworks within Lower Makefield Township.
Sure. So these three ordinances help with the fire service as long as public safety as well. Back in July, myself and Dave got a lot of emails about fireworks in neighborhoods and stuff like that. Looking into our ordinances, we don't have much teeth. So this law will allow us to restrict consumer grade fireworks, require permits for fireworks displays such as Shady Brook or anything like that. With that permit, there is a fee, but there's also a diagram certification that we require. And also we will limit with this ordinance when you can use fireworks, time of year, stuff like that. So people can't just set them off any day of the year. It'll actually spell it out what days, New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, stuff like that. So it'll just help us between myself, any township police officer, code enforcement officer can enforce this ordinance. So.
With that, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
So the second one kind of piggybacks
Hold on,
on.
hold on,
Oh,
hold on,
sorry,
Tim.
sorry.
Hold on.
Did anyone second it? If not, I will second it.
I will second.
Thank you, John. So motion made by Dan, seconded by John. Any conversation by the board?
Really quick, just curious, you mentioned certain days that all this could be, that they could be used. Could you run through those to make sure we cover?
Sure. It's New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, the Lunar New Year, Memorial Day, Labor Day, July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, Diwali.
2 of the ordinance, right, page 2.
Tim, would they be able to use them through special permit any other time of year?
Yes, for the smaller Class C that you can buy, locally. Yes, you can use them now. If it's a nuisance, then we can go out and enforce it. But if they want to actually have a display, then they can go through the permitting process and get approval by myself, the police department, and code enforcement. Yep.
Okay, I'm just thinking gender reveals. That's been a big thing for fireworks. People use them for that sort of thing. So would you consider that just?
And
a
that's more
one-off,
of, that's
or-
more of like a pyrotechnics more than fireworks.
Okay.
So, but we also have permits for that as well.
Is there a height restriction on the aerials that you're speaking of? Like, is it up to a certain height, over a certain height? Because you said class C. I'm not sure what that exactly would.
It's more on the grams of the explosive in there.
Okay.
So you're talking fireworks, you're talking, big ones and stuff like
So
that.
anything that's aerial, something that you can buy in Marsville, it's
Correct.
$100 up in range. That's
Yes.
kind of, yeah. Okay.
Yes,
So that stuff you would need special permits for.
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you have a fee schedule, Tim, for various types?
It is on our fee schedule. Yes, for fireworks permits and stuff like that. So it can be adjusted for residential and commercial use. Yes.
And relatively, distance from a property or home?
It's all labeled out in the ordinance, 150 feet, can't be shut off of an occupied dwelling, stuff like that. No matter how many acres you have, you got to have some kind of perimeter and stuff like that. So.
Question. So
Mhm.
this is on the definition of consumer fireworks. And my initial reading is such that I think I'm okay, but by way of background, I, as a child, played with model rocketry, Estes model rockets. So, and they had 4 specific class of engines, or motors, they actually had explosive charges, right?
Mhm.
So depending on your view of that, you could consider them a firework. Ironically, that the Estes company every year, when they send you out the catalog, would tell you that as long as you've abide by the rules, no one's ever been injured by them. So would a model rocket be exempt from consumer fireworks? Yeah.
It all depends if it causes a damage or not. I mean,
So let me
So
explain
if-
what
if-
they are and how they work. The model rocket itself usually has a plastic cone at the top.
Mhm.
Then it's going to have something that's really akin to like the tube that you have for your paper towels, and then it has balsa fins. So again, all stuff that if it hits a building or something would just crumple up. Yeah, not all cases. I'll give you a scenario on personal experience. The motor has it has a charge that's sent, and the device, depending on the structure of the motor and the weight of the rocket, will go between, say, 250 to 2,000 feet, or even more, depending if you use higher level engines. You need a very wide area to do this, so it's not like you can do it in your backyard. Even if you have an acre lot as a kid, you got to have stuff around, because otherwise it'll land in someone's roof, and you don't want that. But I want to make sure that children can continue to do model rocketry and do it, in areas, open space where right now, without having to file any paperwork or worry about this, because they can buy them at stores, they can buy them online. They're even in states that prohibited fireworks, you're always able to use model rocketry in I believe all 50 states. So that's why I'm curious about that. And if you don't have 100% answer and this listener's not 100% sure, I have some of the stuff I haven't lit one off in years. I could show you how they work, or you can watch videos and it'd give you a chance to figure this out.
Well, the good news is we're just
Advertising. So,
advertising
yeah,
tonight,
just
so
gives
we
you
we have the time that we can look at that.
and this is more targeting the residents that want to use the display type fireworks
Yep.
on their, residential property. That's what
Yeah.
we're trying to get at.
I agree.
Because we did have a lot of complaints about that in such as Yardley Hunt and stuff like that, that you could hear them.
Oh,
and they
yeah.
were-
So
that's where that's targeting. The model rockets, that could be on an individual basis if they want to call my off. I mean, I have no problem with that. I mean,
Okay.
they know the parameters, they know what they got to keep it away from and stuff like that.
right, and the sound is very low. The
Mhm.
charge that sends out it's like a poof sound, and you barely hear that as it is. That's what shoots the parachute out.
Correct.
Down to.
So, John, I hear you, and I have to tell everyone that I'm trying not to hear this in-depth conversation over here about model rockets. They have schematics up on the computer. I'm wondering if it makes sense to pause. I understand the intent of this, and I think it's a valuable ordinance that needs to be considered, but I wonder if we need to,
Since we're just advertising, and I
well,
think
even advertising costs
Yeah.
a penny.
Okay.
So do we want
You
to
want
just
to
take
table
some?
this tonight and defer to, so we do a little homework on it? We could do that.
Make a motion to table.
Thank you. Motion to table by James, seconded by Dan. Go ahead, say one thing.
So our little sidebar here was looking at APA section 87-1 and their definitions of types of rockets, et cetera. And there's a couple different that may be included. So that's probably where we could go as a group to figure out.
Yeah, that was going to be my thing as well, is that we should understand the definition in that standard. And I started doing the same thing as I was sitting here as well. So
Oh my
to-
God.
to-
Motion to table. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Let's go to number 2.
No, that's fine.
Details.
Love our rock.
As long as none of you referenced all the candles on my cake, that's fine. Let's go. B.
All right, B. So this kind of piggybacks on the vacant ordinance that we modified last year with the any home that is damaged by fire or a natural disaster. We put a time frame on them of letting us know what they're doing. This will also go into that. This will require the insurance company to put money into an escrow so that if that property sits vacant for too long and we have to do something, secure it, put fences up, we're not out the money. This ordinance actually was enacted by the state, and then the state advised local municipalities and boroughs to enact it as well. So when a fire occurs, the insurance company has to look it up. It'll be filed with the state. And if that municipality has it, they have to put the sufficient funds in the escrow with that township in the event that we have to do something to that property for safety reasons. So.
There a motion?
So moved.
There a second?
Second.
Motion made by James, seconded by John. Any discussion by the board? Any,
Just like we talked about last time, we want to make sure that residents that are, they're experiencing something very negative here, right? All right, Damon, we want to make sure that there's flexibility for you and other staff to work with them so that they can move forward in a positive way.
Correct. And this is not something the homeowner will put in. This is their insurance company. That's where that money comes from. We won't go after the homeowner for that.
Actually forces the insurance company to cover the cost rather than the homeowner having to chase.
Correct. Based on the amount of damage that they're, yes, correct. So
and we've had a few,
$7,500 threshold. Is that correct, Tim?
$7,500 threshold. Yes. Anything above that, it's a percentage. Yep. Mhm.
That customarily will cover the cost that you're speaking of.
Yes. And if nothing comes out of the escrow, once everything is done, permits are done, everything is status quo, any taxes or anything that is already paid, that money will go back to the resident or the insurance company. However, yep.
and I know we've had a few of these situations in the township in recent years, so thank you for that. Any public comment? With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. C.
So as you know, the fire company responds to a lot of calls each year, roughly about 400 fire alarms we go to. For the past 20 or 30 years, with the help of the police department, we've been able to try to eliminate or mitigate some of the malfunctioning alarms that we go out repetitively for. So looking at our ordinances, trying to get some teeth behind it. This false fire alarm ordinance will actually target malfunctioning alarms, people that neglect to get it fixed. They have a known problem. They just decide not to fix it, and we get dispatched multiple times. So it actually puts a fee requirement on there for the multiple fire alarms. Anything after 2 in a calendar year, there'll be penalties to get it fixed. And the violations go up per false fire alarm. This is all documented in the software that we have through the fire station or the fire company that they have to document it. So I'm just asking to have some teeth so that we can go out. It actually already in other municipalities have served great deal of purpose. It's cut down on their false fire alarms pretty dramatically. And there will be a different fee for residential to commercial. So because unfortunately it's more on the commercial side that we go repetitively to different places. But there are some residentials that we do go repetitively. So.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Dan, seconded by John. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, James.
Couple questions for you, Tim.
Yep.
Can you just give us some background on the costs associated with a call? Roughly, it doesn't have to be exact, what you think.
So when we get dispatched for a fire alarm, you're usually having anywhere between 10 to 15 volunteers responding in their own vehicles, and they get to the firehouse, 2 fire trucks, $1 million fire trucks on the road. And then usually a fire chief vehicle, which is 80 and 90,000. So you're talking almost $2.5 million on the street to go to the answer a false fire alarm. And when you go to them multiple times in a calendar year, it becomes a big liability. So we're just trying to cut them down.
What's the impact on volunteers?
The volunteers, yeah, the roads, the asset out on the road, the fuel.
And
through the
unfortunately,
process and-
as you go to multiple places, multiple times, it's a boy who cried wolf. So you get less and less volunteers to come out.
Sure.
And unfortunately, if it is a true emergency, now you're caught behind the 8 ball. So
What is the penalty for residential?
it'll be broken down in the fee schedule. So I believe I have it broken down as once you get first 2 are free, basically. You get warnings. So after your second one, you'll get a letter from my office saying what's happening. Please get it fixed. Once you hit the third one, residential, I believe, is $100. The commercial side is $400. The fourth false alarm is $200 on the residential side, $800 on the commercial side. And then the fifth one up is $400 on the residential side and $1,000 on the commercial side.
So
That's in a calendar year, yeah. Once again, it's not looking to make money, it's just looking to make sure that they get their problems
It's a deterrent
fixed.
more for them.
Yes,
Got it.
correct.
That was it.
Question on the money. So we have we're not unique, but our situation is we have a volunteer fire service
Mhm.
that, along with you as a paid employee of the township. When we're assessing fees, where do those fees and penalties that are paid go? Do they go to the township?
They go back into the fire fund.
Okay.
So it goes back into the money that's either allotted to the volunteer fire company or to offset whatever other assets that are
So it
needed
goes
for the
back to
fire.
Fire services. in
Correct,
general.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Does
Mhm.
that offset, that's a great question. Does that offset our debt towards fire services for that calendar year?
It goes into a revenue, yes. If we do collect anything, yes. So
That would be something that would offset our expense or no?
Hopefully it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it'll offset some expense. Again,
I mean, I'm
I
not-
don't
yeah,
know that
not-
we're talking
not-
about
Yeah, not the whole.
I mean, again, it's not necessarily the monetary, I mean, the monetary impact is, as you said, is a deterrent to make sure that people are appropriately maintaining their fire alarm systems. So-
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, while we're on the topic of the fine amounts, the ordinance here that I have in front of me says the fine will be not less than 100 nor more than $500.
that is for a person that is known violating the ordinance. So if you see that any person who violates this ordinance or assists in the violations. So if a fire alarm company comes out and knows that they're circumventing the fix some way,
Yeah,
they can be penalized $100 up to $500.
I'm concerned that the construction says who violates the ordinance. You talk about a fee schedule will be determined, right?
So if you,
Then
yeah,
it says,
That's in the paragraph, I'm sorry, the section before that.
correct, yes. In the paragraph before, the section before, it identifies the first and second false fire alarm, and then the third and the fourth and the fifth, and everything will be determined in the fee schedule that is approved by you guys every year.
okay, and so
That's different from the section 4 actually is more of the criminal prosecution side of it, quasi-criminal.
okay, as
Yeah.
long as you're comfortable that
Yeah.
that 4 doesn't limit 3, I'm comfortable.
Yeah, what I would suggest too is going forward, this and actually many other ordinances we have, we should have we do at the end of every year, have a resolution many times with setting amounts for different things. We would probably want to add this to that list of things for section 3 here, the fees.
So from a fee perspective, kind of like we do with park and rec fees, for example.
Exactly.
We do it every year. It's not, we don't have to update the ordinance every year.
No, that's why you do it by
Yeah,
resolution.
no, just
Sure,
making
yep,
sure.
yep.
Anybody else? Any public comment?
I'm sorry, I'd had another question. The topic of the ordinance relates to false fire alarms, but under the definition of false alarm, we're defining a false alarm to include any alarm which is not the result of attempted illegal entry, burglary, intrusion, fire, medical, or similar emergency. So if I have a medical alert system that goes off, is this ordinance applicable under that definition, or?
No,
wait,
this
No,
is
it's
just,
not. It's
for-
separate. That's separate. There
That's
is none
separate.
for medical, but there is for police, burglar and there are other types of alarms.
So this,
This was segregated from the ordinance, to be specific to the fire company. So Tim's ordinance was
Colin's just simply
segregated.
saying the definition should be looked at to make sure it's reflective of what
Yeah,
the
I'm-
intent of this
I'm
ordinance is.
concerned
The-
that we're
the def-
defining a
The
false alarm.
definition is broader than what the stated preamble to the ordinance is, which deals with fire alarms.
right. This could be interpreted to authorize fines.
Like that should almost be false fire alarms and define what false fire alarms constitutes, not false alarms. False alarm definition is broader than what the purpose of the ordinance is.
correct, yes.
You want to change the wording to false fire alarm? Is that what you're saying in the heading?
I mean, my recommendation, what I would like to do is to change the definition to narrow the scope specifically to apply to fire alarms.
Right.
So that this ordinance can't be used more broadly than the vote of the board in the future.
So you want to take away the false fire alarm, how it says it, and just put false alarms? Is that what you're
In
looking at?
definitions,
no.
section 1, where it
Vice
says false
versa.
alarm,
Okay,
it defines that any signal activated by an automatic protection device, any audible alarm, et cetera, right, that dispatches police or fire or emergency response, that is not the result of an attempted illegal entry, burglary, intrusion, et cetera. I mean, I could be naive. I don't understand how an attempted burglary would trigger a fire alarm and how that would be considered false.
No, you're correct, Supervisor. That wording should have come out of that, and that was just an oversight, I'm sure.
Okay, so
Fine.
that would be my recommendation
yeah,
is
we
that
can
we,
take that out.
We can, if you enact with that change, what, actually, we're meeting on Monday about something else, we can actually hammer out that
That's fine.
wording.
You can take that out.
So, yeah,
No confusion.
And
That's fine.
so it'll be advertised as corrected?
yes,
Okay.
yes, that would be appropriate to amend the motion to advertise as corrected per the discussion, upon the motion.
so I'd like to offer an amendment that we vote to advertise the ordinance with corrections as discussed to the definition of false alarm.
Is there a second?
I'll second the amendment.
Does the maker of the motion accept it?
Who was the maker? It was me?
I thought it was,
My notes say it was Supervisor
Yeah,
Grenier.
I
and-
absolutely accept that.
Yeah.
Right.
and then.
You made the second.
Yeah.
On
I thought
that
it was-
note, I was
That's what
deeply
made it.
concerned that my medic alert alarm or my Apple Watch would start firing off
Apparently your Apple Watch does.
false alarms. So on that note, I do accept.
Okay, so with that, call the question on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Now call the question on the actual motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 5-0. Happy tweaking and publishing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Didn't mean to make that one difficult. Thank you.
It's your turn, Derek. Very good catch.
Because you start to think about like the watches and stuff.
That's the.
Yeah.
Okay, we are on agenda item number 8A, which is consider awards of the snowplow contractors.
Yes, no one wants to talk about this right now.
This is
Good
actually
evening.
the highlight of today's meeting for me,
No.
Derek.
He told me before
I did. I actually said.
So before the supervisor this evening is the award of the 2023-2024 snow plowing contractors. Again, this is done every year to help offset our crews that is much needed. This year we had 4 contractors respond to the bids, and I would recommend awarding to all 4 on the as needed basis. They would be Corcoran Landscaping, Green Grass Landscaping Services, Marazzo's Manor Lane Landscaping, and Effluent Retrieval in accordance with the pricing that they provided in their contracts.
Is there a motion?
Moved.
Motion made by John, seconded by Dan. Any discussion from the board? John, since you're so excited.
Yeah, this year is likely to have a lot more snow than normally, according to initial forecasts. So I'm supportive of having 4 options for us, and I want people to know to be patient when snowing occurs. And specifically, I noted we had some smaller trucks in there. Those were needed for cul-de-sacs or which?
So historically, again, we depend on all 4 contractors at one time to help cover the entire township as once. So we depend on all this equipment at one time for any plowable event that we can't handle in-house to get to everyone in a reasonable amount of time. Yes, there are cul-de-sacs that we depend on more of the loader equipment that the one contractor offers us, that he historically does the cul-de-sac zones. So he handles those areas for us. And some of the guys with this other smaller trucks, again, get in the areas that we don't typically get into. We're focused on more the main roads and making sure they're safe and they can play in the smaller areas.
Yeah, it's just, this is a year, I think we better be ready.
We're going to be ready. Unfortunately, the contractors are dwindling down in size. Again, they're feeling labor shortages just like everyone else, increasing costs. So hopefully, they can provide for us as needed.
Awesome.
Anybody else? Any public comment? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. I didn't mean to cut you off.
How did we get last year?
None. We had one large salting event and about a few minor ones where we just hit major intersections. There was not one plow hit the ground last year.
Do we have to leverage anybody outside of township?
No, it was all inside forces. So we used no outside contractor last
The
year.
year is not over. Please do
I
not
know. Well,
keep
that's
that.
true. We're not
all that
done the
stuff.
2023 snow season.
Yeah.
Good this year. Yeah.
Any other comments?
Precipitous, as they say. So it could be wet. It could be
I,
wet.
I saw very fuzzy squirrels. Any public comment? Hearing none, I call the question. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Aye. Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Thank you, Derek. Monica. 9A. Okay. Oh, pictures. Thank you, Monica.
Yes, you're welcome at your request. Okay, so I'm really here today to ask for an extra $10,000 out of fee in lieu for the 5 Mile Woods ADA Transition Plan Pico Green Region Grant project. So far, what we're looking to do is kind of extend the path a little bit further. With site conditions, we recognize that we were going to have to change what direction we were going. This is the original drawing. So now what we'll do is we'll similarly go along that path. It's very close, but it would turn downward in the drawing towards the bottom of the screen. It's about 100 extra linear feet, which would connect us into another section of path. So it just makes more sense to extend it that little bit more to create more access. So if you could, I just want to show you kind of what the condition is now. On the left-hand side is what it looks like today. I went out there right before the meeting, took a picture. It was hard to see because of all the leaves, but I just want to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. And then the picture to the right or center is what the path would look like when it's all complete. And then the area to the right is where we're trying to get, which is the vernal pool area.
Is there oh, sorry, go ahead.
What do you want to say?
Go back to that picture because what Monica is not showing is me standing off to the left.
Oh, no.
Next picture, next picture.
You've made one actually.
Uh-oh.
So I did talk about the little bit of lengthening that we're looking to do, which is to the 710 linear feet. As you recall, I did come to you last year for 10,000. You expanded it to 20,000 to make it wider if we could. We can make it wider. So I'd be looking at, that's all fee and lieu money. But we would be extending it also. So this is us working, and that's Suzanne in the back in the pink. So we already did secure someone to pave our ADA spaces. That's going to be 6,800. Initially, we thought we were going to be able to do that in-house, but we found that we weren't, and we were able to get a very good price. Which, I mean, we did quote it out 3 quotes, and this was the best. The decking, we're going to go with a CoStar's quote of 29,592. And then we'll need some additional hardware that isn't included in the CoStar's quote. And we do have to pave a small path from where the parking lot is to the main pad, and that will be done in-house by staff. So the total project will end up being $40,000 with a $10,000 PICO grant, 30,000 from the township. And that's all I have for slides. I just wanted to, show you where we were. I just wanted to tell you, the Friends of 5 Mile Woods has been very involved with this project. We were boots on the ground. We did cut out and clear the whole area. We are moving along. It's just that extra little bit we're going to need to make it that connection. So what I'm asking for today is the permission to spend the extra $10,000.
Is there a motion? I'll make the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Colin. I'll start off the discussion, and I told Monica, don't take any pictures of me, and then I make jokes about it. I was really impressed when I was out there helping the volunteers. So this is a project to make one of the paths in 5 Mile Woods ADA accessible. We did get a grant from PICO, and the rest of the money is coming from fee in lieu of. If you could have seen those people working that day, it was an incredibly humid day. And the work that had to be done so that we could keep this as cost effective as possible. It's really a labor of love. And it has come to my attention of how important it is, because we have very little opportunities for those who are physically challenged to take advantage of our natural resources. So I understand, because of where the trees are and whatnot, why we've had to pivot a little bit, and the idea of bringing it to the vernal pond, which is really something. If you haven't had a chance to see it in the spring, please do. I'm fully supportive, as you can tell, and I hope that we can make this happen. Anybody else on the board?
I have a quick question. Can you go back a couple of slides to the one where you were showing the side by side of what the existing path looked like and what it will look like? So in kind of piggybacking to what you were saying, it's the effort of volunteers is great. Do we have a plan in place from a maintenance standpoint to ensure that it looks like the middle slide during leaf events? Because essentially, I mean, it's in the woods, right? So it's going to always look like it does on the left.
Right. Yeah.
So do we have any kind of maintenance plan, or is there public works that's involved to make sure that we're going out and maintaining the path on a weekly basis during fall?
Now, it
Okay.
will be hard to keep up with in fall.
Okay.
We do recognize that, but yes, we do have a plan in place. We also do cooperate quite closely with the Friends of 5 Mile Woods, who help us on a very regular basis. So I'm sure we could coordinate extra volunteer efforts during fall season to help with this. As you can see, the rails on the side, if you see in the shadow there, they're not touching the base of, and that's specifically so you can slide dirt and debris underneath the rail. We left that gap there specifically for that. So that was thought of as we were planning. And we did discuss how we're going to keep it clear enough to participate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in
But
favor of.
fall will be tough.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend.
I mean, and I would imagine that's most of the time that people would, not most, but it probably constitutes a big percentage of time that people want to spend time back there because of the foliage and that sort of thing. And I guess keeping that path clear is probably, the most important thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of it as long as we can keep it looking as like the one in the middle, because ideally that's what we want to present as far as the walking trail or even the ADA accessibility of it. But that's it.
I like the idea. Have we had our township engineer review the concept just to make sure that we're not, that we're in compliance with Chapter 105 and Pennsylvania Code and 404 of the Clean Water Act in terms, since we are wetlands and floodways and vernal pools?
I've been working closely with Jim Majewski, not necessarily a township engineer. So he's been reviewing the project along the way. I guess he could confirm.
There are exemptions for things like this. We don't want to do something that we shouldn't be doing when we're trying to do something that's really
Sure.
good. You know what I mean? So keep it simple. So generally, I'm in favor of, we just have to make sure that we maintain compliance with those very specific regulations.
I mean, as you know, John Hilferty is very involved, and that is what he does.
Well,
I mean, not exactly. I don't.
no,
wanna
but
get
well,
too big.
I used to work with John way back when.
Yes.
He's a New Jersey DEP former employee, knows his stuff inside out and backwards. Doesn't necessarily work the Pennsylvania regs all as much, but they're similar. So we just want to.
No, John,
John's a great
John
guy.
was there
Yeah.
mocking me as I sweat. Any other comment from the board? Go ahead, Colin.
So a couple of things. So first, I just want to applaud the township for undertaking an effort to make 5 Mile Woods ADA accessible. It's one of my family's favorite places in the township. And prior to losing some family members in COVID, they had a difficult time navigating that experience with us. So I'm happy to see this happening. I do have some questions. I've worked a lot with ADA over my career, and I get really protective of people saying they're doing things that are ADA compliant. So you had talked about increasing the width of the path from 3 to 5 feet. Has that already been authorized and done?
From 4 to 5 feet. Nothing has been done yet, but yes, it'll be 5 feet.
Okay, so it will be a 5-foot path.
Yeah, it'll be 5 feet in most areas unless there's a, tree that we have to get ourselves around, then it will reduce to 4 is the smallest it will get.
Okay, good.
And Colin, there are bump outs along the way too.
Perfect. To James's point about the leaves, I also happen to be a woodworker, and one of the worst things you can do for wood is to just let wet stuff sit on it covered, and ADA compliant wooden paths become ADA hazards rather quickly when leaves are left. So I would strongly encourage the township, after I'm no longer in this seat, to make sure that we work to have a plan to get leaves cleared as quickly as we can. It will also cut down on long-term maintenance and replacement. So that's it. I mean, I think this is a great initiative, and I'm very supportive.
Great, thank you. And I just want to remind that this is going to be solely built by volunteers. This is not, we're not hiring anybody to do this. It's all a volunteer effort.
I have tools. I'm happy to come help. Just send me an email.
I'm gonna send it your way.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, one quick, did Disability Advisory Board review this at all?
They did not review, they were involved with the initial.
Initial planning?
Yeah, as far as the ADA transition plan, and we did go over it a couple of times, but they haven't been over it recently.
Okay.
I'd be glad to share it with.
Yeah.
You. Lisa and I talk.
Send it to Lisa, and then there's a gentleman who can review just to make sure, but I'm assuming if you were okay before then I'm sure you're fine now.
Sure. And I just want to remind everybody, it's a parking spot to trail experience. So you're going to have the spot that you don't have now. You're going to be able to get out of even if it's a van accessible spot, get from the parking spot. I mean, we were very clear on how we're going to connect from this parking spot to the pad, from the pad to the path. So we were very careful in making sure that it's from the time you enter the park all the way to the end that you can have an experience.
That was a concern that I had earlier in the Patterson Farm when they indicated, here's an area where you could take handicapped individuals closer to the attraction, and it featured gravel pathways and gravel parking. So happy to see that we're doing this. I know we want less impervious surface, but it's important for safety.
Great. Any public comment? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those who are in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, 10, engineers report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two items on the agenda tonight. The first is a payment request for the South Drive Culvert Replacement Project. This is payment certificate number 2. It is work completed to date. The work has been inspected, quantities verified by our inspection team. The payment is in the amount of $39,306.33. The remaining amount of the contract following this payment would be $80,189.15. The contract end date, as per when they were issued their notice to proceed, is tomorrow, November 2nd. The final work and coordination is being complete with coordination with PWA, who had to do some utility work as part of the work out there. So it's substantially complete. The road is, the culvert's been installed. It's open again, as Dave knows. And yes, and the final pavement will be done after the utility work is complete. So a little past the November 2nd date, but soon coming. We're hoping to have that wrapped up pretty soon. So with that, the request tonight is for approval of payment certificate number 2.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Dan, seconded by John. Before I open it up to the other supervisors, Dave, there's no issue with the fact that the contract says November 2nd and apparently it won't be done.
No, I think, I think you can, the payment date is going to be coordinated through the engineer anyway. So I think we'll be fine.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead, Dan.
Just this.
I see you.
I was actually writing down something, another regulation thing. The usual question. You're satisfied with everything and you're ready to pay, and there's going to be some left over for additional fixes as needed.
Yes, the payment tonight, everything's been verified for the quantities. Mentioned the coordination with PWA. There was also some areas for some additional backfill with the construction of the culvert. So those items are being worked out and finalized. A change order of quantities would be expected most likely either at next meeting or the one in December to have all that ironed out. And we'll share that as soon as we have that coordinated. With that change order, we would also include a proper extension of the end contract date as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any public comment? Sorry.
Clarify, that's for circumstances not caused by the contract. That's obviously, so we.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you, Dave. Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, thank you. The second item we have just some general project updates, work that's been ongoing and that we've provided updates for the last few meetings, mostly involving the stormwater and infrastructure work that's been ongoing. Just some updates, the Maplevale inlets at the south intersection of Maplevale Drive and Taylorsville Road. The modifications to those inlet boxes has been completed. The one on the north side of the intersection, you'll notice anybody that's been down there has still a few cones around it. That's for the concrete that's in there to finish curing. Once those forms are taken out, the grate would be able to sit flush with the box there, and those cones will be removed. That should be pretty short coming here. So the next couple of days, hopefully that'll be in good shape to remove those forms.
Sorry, that's the inlet that was covered with the metal plate for a period of time?
Correct. Yeah.
Thank
So the metal plate's all gone. Inlet boxes
Perfect, thank
repaired and just waiting for that concrete to cure. The Highland Drive Drainage Improvements project, which focuses on Highland Drive coming down to Taylorsville, really managing the stormwater to capture more and getting it into the stream going downstream, which is towards the interchange with 295. Basically having it directed and captured away from where it could spread into Mapleville Drive neighborhood area and going south. That project we have reviewed with staff. We do have an open house for the public in the neighborhood. We confirmed the scheduled date for that is going to be next Thursday, the 9th, 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. here at Public Hall. And it will be an open house kind of format. So we'll have the plans available for feedback. If there is anybody that cannot make that date and time, we're happy to receive feedback either through email or other ways they can get it to us. The plan and the information for that, working with staff, we're looking to get that up and available for folks to take a look at leading up to that date as soon as we can by the end of this week, hopefully. So there'll be some lead time. Folks can look at that and ask some questions. And finally, just to mention the stream clearing efforts that have followed the work that Public Works has already completed. That's the stream on either side of Taylorsville Road that had a lot of issues during those storms over the summer. It was an effort to look at if there are gravel bars and things of that nature that were obstructing the stream. Working with land studies who started their work, there may not be as much of that as obstructions to the stream, but with the discussions we've had with DEP and also the Army Corps, the effort of kind of walking through assessing the wetland limits and also some photographs of if there are those gravel bar obstructions is something that we're looking to plan to do regardless. And then that'll kind of determine if it's worthwhile to go through the whole permitting process for doing that work, or if it's more of a global look with the other work that land studies is looking at identifying. So that'll be another thing that we have coming up shortly. And those are the updates I have this evening.
Any supervisors want any questions? Okay. Is there any public comment?
Excuse me, I would just say that the date for the open house, that was just determined today. Again, we're trying to be, keep the process moving. So that'll be communicated on the township website, in addition to the communication this evening. And then we'll also send the material to the email listserv that we've maintained as well to encourage folks to attend next week. Again, I think the intent is to be in a position to have the Board of Supervisors authorize the release of a bid for that work here probably in December, I would imagine, right? Perhaps November, but probably likely in December.
That's where we're aiming for, right? The plan at this stage is to be like a final draft plan and then looking for feedback from the neighborhood, any other feedback to finalize any design items, and then it would be ready for requesting authorized to get the bidding process underway.
So again, just for budgetary sort of discussion related to that, again, you'll have this discussion as you go through the budget. But currently the draft as prepared by staff does allocate funds in 2024 for completion of this project. So that's currently contemplated.
Any public comment? You're okay? Okay, thank you. Then with that, we're on to agenda item number 11, managers report.
I don't have anything specific this evening. I'm happy to address any questions that anyone may have.
Do you have any?
Yeah, let you go first.
No, I want to go.
Just want to go blow right by that. I get it. I think what you just spoke about was tops of my list. I'm also wondering on the Woodside Road bike path. I don't know if that's an engineer question or a manager's question, but
Yeah, I'll sort of punt it over to Isaac. Isaac can talk a little bit about that and I'll fill in where appropriate.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Woodside Road Path update on that project. If you've been by yesterday or today, you've noticed they've cleaned up and removed all the kind of old erosion and control measures that were out there, the compost filter sock, a lot of the stakes, the delineators that were near those socks right along the road edge. So that actually is much more clear, which is, welcomed update to what the contractor was working on out there. There's a few items that they're coordinating with us on for detail, which is the slope along that basin, some other small pieces, and the punch list items they can do up until when the poles are moved. We're looking to coordinate that, in the near term here. We did have meetings and got some good progress with the utility companies, Pico, Verizon being the two lead ones with those poles. They went out. If you're out there, you'll see stakes that say face a pole on there. That's where they're going to be moved to. And then what they do from here is that we're setting up another follow-up call with them just to confirm everyone's on the same page. Pico has a standard like 16-week window of when they basically put their pole relocation design plan together for their contractor, and then they bid it out for their contractor to get it done. So that would be done as we go into the winter. And the areas of the trail that would be revised following those pole relocations really couldn't be paved until the spring anyhow, with the temperatures dropping. So the goal is that when those poles are moved, we'll be able to kind of get on the tail of that and set up the last pieces that have to be redone to address the straightening out of those sections of the trail.
And related to that, I don't know if you want to share, we also met about the crossing as well. I don't know if you want to share that information with the board. I mean, obviously just an update that we're having discussions about the crossing of Taylorsville Road from Woodside to continue that and ultimately make the connection into the towpath path. So I don't know if there's anything else that
many paths types there. Yes, we met with staff talking about just the steps necessary with PennDOT. That's all PennDOT jurisdiction there across in Taylorsville, talking about the options that are at each corner to make that crossing come to fruition. And the next step with that would be to meet personally with PennDOT and their folks to just lay out exactly what they would need to get that permitting done as quickly as possible.
It's more with the new website, starting to get feedback on it. Most people are very positive about it, as probably expect. The one comment or question I keep getting is, hey, why didn't you respond to that comment I put there? And I said, what comment are you speaking of? So, well, I put comments in the portal that I thought would go to you. And it's nothing that we've ever seen. So I said, well, email me those comments and then I can respond to you.
Okay.
So if we could look at when comments are submitted through the portal, if there's something that looks like it's asking for a supervisor response.
Sure.
There's a way to figure out how to share that with us. So we know that people are trying to get in touch with us.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what they're referring to. I don't know if they're talking about comments through Zen City, if they're talking about comments through OpenGov, are they talking through comments? So we will have to look into that, but absolutely, to the extent that there's something that is coming in that seems to be intended for solicitor or a supervisor, and we'll make sure that that information is conveyed to you. I don't know, Jim, do you have any idea what they may be speaking about? So we'll look into it, but
Yes.
again, to the extent that there's things that are directed to supervisors, we'll make sure that it's conveyed.
Yeah.
Then we're done with the manager's report and we're on to the solicitor's report.
Yes, so Madam Chair, briefly, there was an executive session tonight to start at 6:30. Excuse me. All supervisors who are present here tonight were at the executive session, except Supervisor Grenner, who was either in the air or on the way up here, want to understand. And as well as Chief Coluzzi, Mr. Kratz, and myself. The items discussed were informational, litigation, real estate, and personnel, and the executive session ended just before this meeting started. That is my report.
Thank you. With that, supervisor reports. I don't have one. John?
I do not have one.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Dan.
I just want to say thank you to everyone that reached out. A week ago, last Wednesday, my hometown experienced what no hometown ever really wants. And it was a mass shooting. You probably saw that on the news last week. That's where I grew up. Horrible thing. But I just want to say thank you to everyone that reached out, because it's my parents still live there. That's where I grew up. That's where I went to high school. I had my prom at the bowling alley that was in the news site. But anyway, thank you for that.
Colin?
I have one item related to the planning commission, which I cannot say is the best commission in the town because it's where I volunteered before joining this board. So I won't say that. But we do have a material change that I think is just important to bring up in the broader forum. For the last several months, the planning commission has been advertising on the agenda the receipt of plans, which has caused some confusion among residents who believe that a certain project or housing development is on the agenda for discussion. And it's created some confusion and some residents coming in and wasting time when we don't have anything to show them or to inform them about. It's just saying the town's office has received a plan and a timer has started. So we are not going to advertise those specific receipt of plans on the agenda. They will be advertised on the website through the normal channels that planning uses to notify the public. So it's just a small but important change.
Okay, then we're on to agenda item number 14, other business. Is there any other business? No? Okay, then with that, appointments and reappointments, I don't believe there are any.
It's not, no.
Okay, so then we're up to agenda item number 16, which is public comment. Is there any public comment? Please.
Robert Abrams, 652 Teach Drive. I should have said something about the farm. I, like Mr. Daly, agree with everything you're doing with it, and I have not agreed with anything, especially that monstrosity across from Shady Brook that's going to be a traffic nightmare. Every year I donate myself and one of my antique cars for Veterans Day. Veterans Day is, when I grew up, was the 11th. The 11th is a Saturday. Can someone tell me why we're having Veterans Day on the 4th?
Perhaps Monica can.
Monica, can you
address that
come up?
issue.
Bless you.
I will preface this by, this was not my decision. We coordinate with the Veterans Committee in order to come up with a date. Typically, it's this, what was for years, the Sunday before Veterans Day. This year, we're doing it this Saturday, or we have been for the last few years doing this Saturday before Veterans Day. The Veterans Committee opted for the Saturday before because a lot of the veterans organizations that we work with are not available on Veterans Day weekend when it falls on a weekend. So they asked us if we would coordinate with them for the week before.
Okay, I just thought it was very disrespectful that Veterans Day couldn't be celebrated on Veterans Day. The RTK I sent in for the Mapleville records. The easiest way to put it is, I believe you intentionally didn't want to answer it because of what I just went through with open records. I still don't have the information, but there is some tidbits. Burton and Hefner had originally put a date through that just happened to be 2 days after the election. How about that? My position at this point, you're withholding records. And no matter what happens in the election, I want those records. Went to a coffee and conversation with our state senator, Santa Sierra. I talked about the Morrisville merger. I talked about the burden on the seniors. Seniors, don't expect anything from anybody politically here. Mr. Sanasiero decided that the area needs new and younger people, and he wants to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. So seniors, stick your hands in your pockets because you're paying for everything now. That's about all I have for tonight. Like I said, very pleased with the farm decision, but really the politics here have to go. And so do some of the supervisors.
All right, Tim Daly, Lower Makefield. I wanted to dovetail some of the stuff that Mr. Abrams brought forward and focus on the RTKs. So originally, the documents were provided on a thumb drive on August 24th after a submission on July 17th. So despite receiving things on August 24th, documents weren't provided until 3 hours before the final determination deadline, 2 weeks after your township was ordered to turn over data on October 6th. And they did it just hours before the final determination. It is overt bad faith that your law firm has committed. There's a complaint and ask for a ruling of bad faith. If there was ever a poster child for bad faith interactions on an RTK with OOR, this RTK it's the poster child. I know that probably many of you on the supervisors board aren't aware of it, and I don't think Mr. Kratzer has done anything inappropriate. I think it's your law firm. I think your law firm has acted roguely. They're a political law firm. We rose these concerns about them not being involved. You decided to keep it with them. So accountability does fall upon you. And like Robert said, we're not going to get any answer from them on until November 8th. And then there's going to be a final determination probably a week or two later. So with what was sent, I want, most of you were not on these emails. So I've gone through 6,000 pages of documents. So Dan was on quite a few of them, but the rest of you, maybe one or two. So a lot of the stuff's going to be new. So I hope you bear with me because I want to give you guys information that you're probably not aware of up to this point from what we've learned so far. So you're aware, 3,500 pages of agendas and meeting minutes that had no pertinence to Robert's request, which was specific to Mapleville, were provided to us. 500 pages about Yardley Woods that has nothing to do with Mapleville. The RTK specifically says Mapleville project. 500 pages of a conference PowerPoint from San Diego that had nothing to do with what we were asking for. And then 250 pages worth of duplicative emails of the same emails over and over and over again. We got maybe 300 or 400 pages of real emails. So your law firm communicated under oath in an affidavit that they couldn't do all of this work because the amount of legal work and the redactions and all that was necessary. All that stuff that I just read to you, almost no redactions, none whatsoever. They lied to the OOR profusely throughout this process. So, but here's what we did learn. So November 2022, you guys had a paving project going down there that was to pave over what Pennsylvania American Water had done to put in new water lines. So during that process, James A. Morrissey communicated to Lower Makefield Township that there was evidence of underground erosion in the Mapleville neighborhood. And the response from LMT employees was, pave it up. We're going to deal with it in May when we have this repaving project that's going on. Whether or not that was the right decision or not, hindsight's 2020, right? So, but pictures were provided to the township that showed deep erosion. They're in the RTK. It was definitely concerning. In the emails, while we don't have all complete, as Robert said, many things have been withheld, and you can see these holes in the documents we've been given so far. It looks like basically it was pushed off and not given consideration, but maybe there's more. So then January, February timeframe, a project starts with Ben Cardino excavators, 2023 earlier this year. So project plan was delivered by the township to the contractor, and the contractor had to stop go twice because of errors by the township in the communication of what was underground. So some of you might be aware, because you probably had to approve the legal settlement, that they destroyed lines for Verizon, and the township had to come with an $7,500 settlement to for the damaged lines that were there. Also, Pico had lines. Neither one of these were marked. So the project had to stop. The plan had to be redone. And I believe, if I had the numbers right, it was about 40 more feet worth of pipe had to be purchased so that you could work around. So we've got elbow joints here, elbow joints there. So instead of a straight line, we're all over the place. So obviously that's concerning. And in speaking with some contractors, if you put piping that's over 45 degrees, more than 45 degrees. So if you do a 90 degree, that's going to be a bad thing. 45 and less is the right way of doing it. And again, don't have details because certain things were removed. But here's where the biggest concern that I have, and I'm glad that there's a couple people who are from Mapleville, because I think you guys are going to be very upset with what you're going to learn with this last piece. So a company named Earl Company was brought on for, I guess, what was called phase 2 of this, which is where you were going to go into the neighborhood. So the Ben Cardino piece was the intersection, Taylorsville and Dan Street, Highland, right? So Earl Company was hired. So on June 22nd, Mr. Kratzer, you sent an email expressing your displeasure that they didn't communicate to you that, oh, this project is being delayed. And the reason for the delay was an employee at LMT once again screwed up a project plan. And I don't know what was screwed up because, again, details have been withheld from us, but they had to go reapply for permits or applications with the state. Again, not exactly sure what the permits were because I'm missing pieces of the puzzle. But as a result of this, they had to change this to what they called in an email, a standard project to a complex project. So obviously, that means somebody in LMT screwed up again, gave the wrong direction, wrong plans to the contractor. Contractor identified the errors and fixed them in advance. But as a result, this puts the project down. And the interesting date of when it started was July 13th. 2 days before this happened. Now, in speaking with my contractor who built Yardley Hunt, he had a lot of familiarities with sewers. And he says, based on OSHA laws and safety laws, if you're going to go work on a pipe or inside a pipe like these, you turn a valve off for worker safety, worker protection. So my question is, did a valve get turned off? Did somebody go home on Friday at 4 o'clock and forget to turn it back on? And is that the reason why this happened? Because it just seems like a strange coincidence that somebody starts 48 hours before this flood happens, working on these drainage pipes, and this explosion happens in this lady's backyard. So what I want to ask for you guys is, as you can see here, we're not targeting any of you. You're covered by insurance. Your contractors are covered by insurance. Let it all play out. Stop withholding documents because these people have already been victimized enough. Do not re-victimize them. That is why Robin and I are doing this. We're not here to attack you. We're here to help them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Follow that. Larissa Luzecki, 18 Mapleville Drive. So I would like to request once again that the flood mitigation be added to the Board of Supervisors agenda. As you all know, we did have a flood meeting held every other week. That was taken off the schedule unbeknownst to us. We were a little surprised. I was surprised because I was ready to go last week and it wasn't on the schedule. This forum in an official capacity is very important to us. We get answers to all of our questions. If one person doesn't know it, another person on the board does. So it's important to us. David, I wanted to thank you for responding to my email. I know that we can always go to you for answers. Sometimes, and in the email, you do state that we can come to you with questions, but sometimes we just don't know what the questions are. I just noticed all the work that was being done along Taylorsville, going on to the on-ramp in 295, just because I drive past there. I don't know how that's going to help us. I just don't understand how the flow of water, I mean, I would like the water to flow that way, but it's something that I just caught. I don't know if April saw that. We're kind of not in the loop of, we're not on the same page with everything that you're doing. I know that you want to make us part of anything that's substantive. That was your word. I would think that at this point, every bit of your work is substantive because we're really working with borrowed time right now. So even if we don't have to do it every board of supervisors meeting, maybe once a month, just put us on the agenda so that we're kind of all on the same page. We kind of really desperately need that. So I'm just appealing to you once again. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody else? Okay. Is there any public comment on the line?
Yes, I do have 2 callers online. Lisa, you're live with the board.
Lisa, can you state
Oh.
your full name and whether you're a resident of Lower Makefield, please?
Yes, my name is Lisa Tenney. I live at 156 Pinnacle Circle, Yardley, PA.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, as a taxpayer in Lower Makefield, I think you all should be embarrassed to witness the decay of the Satterwait House and the farm. It's historical. Buildings are valuable, and of course, they are township-owned lands. That said, I think you should approve number 1, 2, as you did, and also number 3. I fully support a third party taking ownership of the buildings, and such as Preserve Patterson Farm and AOY. They serve as nonprofits and are certainly have greater interest in the community's interest. They're very organized and fully invested in the community as nonprofits. Also, hopefully the zoning changes involving Prickett Preserve will not hold back money and approval of historic preservations of that property. I listened today about the fire company. I would say that they should charge $25 after the first alarm to do an alarm check, and after the second offense, the penalty be higher, 1,000 versus 100, because that seems just like a slap on the wrist. Also, the 5 Mile Woods project of an ADA compliant path, I think should be reevaluated. I've been there and I love that 5 Mile Woods. It's beautiful, the trees. I don't like it as a place to walk. It has a wooden pathway, which you also intend to build as ADA compliant. It's a tripping hazard. It's hard to maintain, and I would not recommend it because it doesn't help all individuals, ones that are older and that don't want to trip. So I would say certainly make spaces available and a small portion available, but extension of a long wooded path in that area just doesn't make sense. And that's all I have to say for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Laura, you're live with the board.
Hi, thank you. It's Laura Tarantino, 185 Durham Road, Newtown. I just wanted to bring attention to the fact that on the agenda, where it mentions the ad hoc property committee presentation, it listed 2 details, which you have addressed with motions. But just as a point of clarity, in the past, it's always under the auspices of Patterson Farm, the master plan. I had looked at this agenda last week. It wasn't on there. I saw the addition, but I thought perhaps we were having another session later for the presentation to the board for budget consideration. So I just wanted to say for the future, it helps to see the master plan. It encompasses more, all the structures, all the other discussions, rather than these 2 points, which were also covered at the most recent ad hoc meeting. The second thing I wanted to ask is, would the formation of the nonprofit organization to have oversight over these structures on the farm, would they be the ones to make a provision that would protect going forward those structures? Because as we know, 25 years passed since the farm was purchased and these structures have deteriorated. We now have a new vigor to restore and revive the structures. But if the next 10 years, it's another board that comes in and they want to do something else, these structures on this portion of land have no protection. Who will establish that protection? Would it be that nonprofit, or would it always fall to the landowner, which would be LMT? That's a confusing point for me. And I think why it's so important is the Satterthwaite question of breaking that house, the farmstead house, away from the farm. I think that sets a bad precedent, sends a bad message, interferes with the historical significance of the farm as a whole. And I just think if we're not protecting that now, it's only going to be open again in the future, and we'll be back at the same spot, and it will affect other buildings. It could affect the Janney house. It could affect the other barn. It could, it just lends itself to being open. And why revisit when we can solve this problem and protect this for the future? Because that is what this conversation has all been about. I thank you very much for listening.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening.
And I see that our solicitor is going to correct whatever I say, but that is exactly what we're trying to establish as we look for options about how to manage the property going forward, to answer those and other questions. So thank you for your
Great. So
comments.
that will be part of that conversation then. Okay, so
Yeah.
I will stay tuned. All right,
Thank you,
thank you very
Laura.
much.
Queens
All righty,
forever.
good night.
I would not correct the word.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Any more public comment?
There's no more public comment on the line.
Right, with that, with there no more further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.